I'm going to discuss the last chapters of the first book of Samuel, or basically right in the middle of the book of Samuel. And we have an interesting correspondence or an interesting parallelism going on there. There were two wars at the time. It says that the Philistines gathered for a major war. They were going to take down Saul and his regime. And King David was sort of in a bind. He wasn't not yet king. He knew he was supposed to be king. That was the rumors going around. The prophets had already announced such a thing. And at the time, he was basically a fugitive. And because of his fear of harm coming to others, especially that of his family and other innocents, as he had seen, Saul was trying to take out David and his men. David decided he's just going to go live in the land of the Philistines. Highly ironic because he was the major opponent of the Philistines. He was Saul's number one warrior against the Philistines earlier in his life. And now he had taken refuge there. And he became a client of Achish, the king of Gath. Here's the funny thing. He wasn't really working for Achish. He was basically raiding non-Jewish villages, attacking the classical enemies of the Jews, and bringing back spoils, and giving a peace to Achish, who gave David his own town, Tsiklag. And David claimed that he was actually attacking fellow Judeans. And that scam worked for quite a while. And David and his men officially had to go as mercenaries and clients of Achish, the Philistine king of Gath, but not king of all the Philistines. There were many different Philistine kings. He had to participate in this war against the army of Israel, Saul's army. Fortunately for David, his bluff was not called. The other Philistines just didn't want him around, and he feigned, protest to Achish. Oh man, I'm such a loyal warrior. Why wouldn't you want me to hear? And Achish says, "Yeah, I know you're my favorite guy, but still, I have to send you back." And it had been previously told to Saul that he was going to fail in this war. So this war is happening on the northern front. Even though the Philistines, they basically were concentrated on Philistia, or Philistia, I'm not sure how to pronounce that. That's nowadays, by the way, basically corresponding to the Gaza Strip and a little bit beyond it, heading north to Ashdod and Ashkelon, which also were part of that area. But the Philistines took over large parts of Eretz Yisrael inland. They went as far almost as Beit Shemesh back in the day. Don't forget, that's where Shimshon was active. And also in the Galilee, they had control of Beit Sha'an and other places like that. And this war zone is actually in Har Gilboa, which is quite far north. So you understand that the Philistines had made significant incursions and had taken away territory from the Jewish people, which is similar to today. We were watching territory being stripped from Jewish control. We saw the Hitnat Kut, now that was 18 years ago. And now basically, this is why we are fasting now. There's large parts of Israeli settlement around Gaza that basically have been destroyed, and it's going to be really difficult to resettle them. Meanwhile, up north, Jewish communities have been evacuated, and I'm afraid this is something that we have to pray that does not happen. Beg God it does not happen. We have to stop this from happening. That we'll also cede territory in the north. Just say, okay, so we'll retreat from these areas and give it to the bad guys, and then the line will just move, and then they'll take away more territory. They're slowly stripping territory. So this is what was happening in Saul's days. So this is the northern front, and Saul knew he was going to fall in battle, and that's what happened. But at the same time, David went home. He had discovered that Amalekites had destroyed his own town, taken all the women and children captive, taken away a lot of spoils, and David's men, his 600 fighting men, were basically ready to mutiny. What happened when Saul fell in battle was, get this, the Philistines desecrated his corpse and that of his children. They chopped off his heads. They paraded their dead bodies. They hung Saul's corpse in their, one of their temples in Beit Sha'an, and they took a lot of captives. And Israelites fled from a lot of territory in the Galilee and across the Jordan River. They were basically in the Transjordan. So this is, I don't know, it's a terrible sign. We hope this doesn't happen. But if the old regime, basically this what's happening, if the old regime is holding on too tightly to power and God doesn't want them to have power, they're going to have to lose big time and take Israel down with them. So David, who's the new messianic regime, he's the one who's being persecuted, puts his trust in God and fights back against the Philistines and against the Amalekites and thoroughly destroys them. and that is the beginning of his kingdom. So this is happening in the southwest. So at the same time, the main Israelite army is losing in the north. David is winning in the south, and that we even have, as a result of this victory, a new shira. There's it says a list of the places to which David sent part of the spoils, and it seems to be a victorious song. So what does this teach us? That the old regime holding on to power must go one way or another. That's basically what Samuel was telling Saul. At least the raised spirit of Samuel was telling him. And if the old regime holds on to power too much, God will have to take them down, as we just said, because the Davidic kingdom, the Messianic kingdom, its time has come. And if they do not let it come, so God's going to have to let it come somewhere or another. Next, this was a suspension of the United Kingdom. I don't mean the United Kingdom of Great Britain and England. I'm talking about the United Kingdom of Israel and Judah. Originally, Saul had seized power. It says, Vailachet. He had people rally to help him. Why? Because at the beginning, he wasn't that popular. Many people, when Samuel announced, okay, here's your king, many people just rejected him. They said, so what's this guy going to do? But then he was, by force, able to unite the people. And he stayed the United Kingdom of Israel. Well, it depends on how long you actually have the chronology going. But David started off first with his 400 men. You read the book of Chronicles, he kept getting more people coming to his side. When Saul was dead, that's when David asked the high priest who had the Urim V'Tumim, he asked him, is it time for me to go back to the land of Judah? And God told him yes. And it was there that the kingdom, that the tribe of Judah, his own tribe, made him their king. Whereas up north, Avner, surviving general of Saul, made Ishbosheth, Saul's youngest surviving son, king of, first it says, Gilad. What's Gilad? Sorry about that. Gilad is a general term for basically everything in the Transjordan. And then it says that it continued to get more tribes. It says in Usher, then Yisrael. Yisrael is also a large part of the Galilee. And then the rest of the tribes, but not Judah. And by the way, Judah was basically in control of Shevet Shimon. If you look closely in this, the fact how the progression happened, Ishbosheth's kingdom, it starts in the Transjordan, and it starts more to the north. Usher was one of the most northern tribes, and then it continues south. I question, based on these hints in the verses themselves, if Saul himself, if Ishbosheth himself, even ruled over the tribe of Benjamin. Why? Because Benjamin's territory was the farthest south of all these tribes, and also adjacent to that of Judah. And it seems that in the first territorial disputes between Avner and Joab, basically the strength behind both thrones, between the strength behind Ishbosheth and King David, their first battle was in Giv'on. And Giv'on is right in the middle of the territory of Binyamin, and also the site of where the tabernacle was at the time, was, as we discussed last year. So they were basically fighting over control of the land of Benjamin. That's where these battles took place. So it wasn't so clear that even Saul's own tribe had accepted David. And we also saw 2 generations later, about 80 years or so later, when Solomon died, the tribe of Benjamin was actually loyal to the Davidic monarch and not the new one from the tribe of Ephraim. Okay, that's just a side point in understanding the verses. So what happened was there were 2 kings in Israel at this time. King David had those who followed him, and Ishbosheth had his own followers. And even after Ishbosheth died, it wasn't so clear. He was assassinated, by the way. Avner was assassinated, as was Ishbosheth, in separate incidences. So it wasn't so clear who would become king. There was a fight going on here, and perhaps this is also a sign for the rest of us. What's going to happen? That it could be, and this is something that we have to understand. There are people like to talk about. They play what ifism. What would happen if the let's say in the Confederacy of the United States had broken off and there hadn't been a civil war? They had successfully broken off even after a war. What would that look like? What if the United States, would press for autonomy because their union is getting too big and destructive? Some states don't like paying taxes to support the other states, for example, whatever it may be. Perhaps in times of crisis as these, it's better for a union to break up. I have seen, for example, that certain local councils, I do not like most politicians. I am not pro any of them. I think a lot of them are selfish and would even sell out their own countrymen, as we have seen many times. But I do know that some local councils really take their security seriously. They know who their enemy is, they know what their enemy is up to, and they are prepared and they stay on guard. So, for example, I think I hope that I'm actually I don't rely on the Israeli government in any way, shape, or form. But at least, let's say the local council seems serious about allowing, for example, those sitting on guard and the soldiers to actually defend themselves. For example, they give all sorts of crazy rules of engagement and underlying philosophical rules about Tohar and Neshek and other such pagan nonsense. And here, the local council does not impose that on people. So I would think it would be better if there was some local administration involved, a little bit of a breakup, or at least give a little bit of autonomy to local groups, hold on a second, certain local groups to govern themselves and to protect themselves. This, by the way, brings up another point. We've said before, Judaism doesn't discuss rights. The sages don't talk in terms of rights, the right to free speech and defend oneself, etc. I'll give an example. Judaism talks about obligations toward others and property. And let's take, for example, self-defense or the right to bear arms. Judaism doesn't say that a person has the right to bear arms, or Judaism doesn't even say that a person has the right to self-defense. Judaism claims, the way the sages have it, is a person has a commandment to engage in self-defense. A person is obligated to practice self-defense. A person is obligated to step in and defend the innocent from others. That's called saving someone from what's called a rodef, a pursuer. So we're much more strict about these things. Judaism certainly, as we've discussed before, does not believe in gun control or things like that. Why? How are people supposed to protect themselves? So I find it almost crazy that, let's say, a government run by Jews is not keeping halacha, instead would require Jewish citizens, Jewish civilians, to have to actually find a way or apply for a license, which could be revoked or not even granted by the governing bodies, a license to carry the basic necessities for one to defend himself. The sages will look at something as ridiculous, something like that's utter nonsense. It should be that everybody has the right to have as many weapons as he wants in order to protect himself. That's at least a classic Jewish way of understanding this. So I believe that what we see here, the fact that there was a small breakup for about 7 years, a breakup of the United Jewish Kingdom of Saul, was a necessary therapeutic measure for the Jewish people. And because we're experiencing upheavals and crises, just like they did at the time, just before the advent of the Davidic kingdom, so too, it would be in our best interests to allow more local and personal autonomy. That's just my opinion.